Following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
It's Monday night at 9 p.m. and time for Sex Talk with the Siegel brothers. Dr. Ricky Siegel is a certified sex therapist, educator, and supervisor, and his brother Larry Siegel is a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator. The Siegel brothers are here to answer all your questions about sex and sexuality, but we're unsure who to ask, including questions you didn't even know you had. They will also welcome guests from around the globe to talk about a wide variety of topics and issues within the fascinating world of sexuality. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to Sex Talk.
Good evening. It's now Friday evening, no longer Mondays. We are happy to be on Friday for Sex Talk with the Siegel brothers. Good evening. My name is Richard Siegel. I'm a certified sex therapist.
And I'm Larry Siegel, a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator.
And my super cool big brother.
Yeah, still my favorite role.
And we are here on AMP2 TV on a whole host of AM and FM radio stations in South Florida.
Yes,
I can't
indeed.
remember the list now. And we're streaming live on Facebook if you're watching us there.
Hello, glad you can join.
Greetings. Please, thanks for joining us, and please hit the like and share buttons. And there's also a button that says send email if you'd like to send in a question or make a comment, or just comment in the usual way, or call in and join us here in the studio on the phone.
You remember the number?
888-565-1470.
There you go.
Right. 888-565-1470 is the call-in number.
Right. Yeah, so if you have any questions about sex or sexuality, or you have any comments you want to make, especially relative to what's been happening in 2019, what might be happening in 2020, give us a call. Right? And again, that's 888-565-1470.
End of year stuff, our last show of the year.
Yes, indeed.
Right.
We're putting another year to bed, as it were.
Yes, indeed. And then is it the end of another decade? Is 2020
Almost.
the end of the teens or the beginning of the 20s? I never can remember that.
Well, I think when we're counting to 10, we always count to 10.
Right.
And we start with 1. So we don't start with 0 and count to 9. So I'm going one more year.
So we got one more year of the 2010s.
Yes. Right? Although mathematically,
Mathematically,
we're
that's a
starting
good,
the 20s. So
That's a good number for what this mess we have to play with tonight.
Yes.
Mathematically, statistically.
Mm-hmm.
It's been an interesting year, and well, politically.
Well, unfortunately, you know, it's funny how so often we get to the end of the year and we look back and we do describe the year politically as interesting, and meanwhile, as we're going through the year, we're pulling our hair out, we're looking under the beds, and we're starting to freak out.
Yeah.
So it becomes interesting once it's past us.
So
what are some interesting things?
well, you know, let's start with these. Where did these?
Yeah, you
come
know,
from?
just some of these little things, just scratch down, making some notes. You know, it's one of those things that, and again, as we're closing the book on another year, I find it a little mind blowing that here we are now coming into 2020, and look at some of the debates we're still having. Look at some of the arguments and the issues that we still have not solved.
The biggest hot button issues in sexuality, the things that people have been fighting about and have been setting us off for going on 30 years
A very
now,
long time.
have
But
not changed.
no.
Except attitudes and values among the population have changed.
Well, yes. However, there's a lot of consistency that we can even look at there. So I think the point that I want to make here is that, you know, we're still debating and discussing these issues. They're not settled. And we're talking about pretty much every one of these things. An overwhelming percentage of Americans are in favor of all of these things.
That's what I mean.
That's the mind-boggling part.
Yeah, that we have like this top 5. I'm sure this is a pretty thorough list. I can't see anything missing. The things that just tick people off, the hot button, the sure guaranteed fight starters in sexuality, right? Abortion, same-sex marriage, gay adoption, sex work,
Mm-hmm.
and sex ed.
Yep.
Still the great sex ed wars of the 1980s
Unbelievable.
still continue as if nothing has changed,
Right.
right? And that's the craziest to me. Were these Google stats,
Yes.
NIH? Or,
Yeah, these stats for sex ed were from Guttmacher.
Alan
And
Guttmacher Institute?
there are many different studies that one can look at, and the numbers are all pretty consistent.
This is insane. 93%
Mm-hmm.
of Americans support middle school sex ed.
Yes, and we're
And-
talking specifically parents.
Right. And 96% support high school sex ed.
Yep.
Which is probably too late most of the time anyway.
I-
So we have something.
Take it where we can get
What else in the United States can you ever find 93 and 96% of people in line on?
Okay, now take that question a step further. What issue can you find people that are 93 and 96% in favor of, and it still can't happen? We're still not even, we're at a place
Right.
where we're doing what all of these people want to be done.
Kind of what a democratic republic is supposed to be about.
One
right?
would think.
Aren't our lawmakers supposed to do the will of the people?
Well, okay.
And as we've been asking since we've started in this field, why in the world are these legal issues at all?
Oh,
why,
sure,
why is it
sure.
up to a state body to determine what and whether something will be taught in the schools?
Yep. Right.
Education is political?
It shouldn't be, but it is. You know, I think Clinton said that. I remember having this discussion during that presidency, who I think one time made the statement that politics ends at the schoolhouse door.
Yeah,
But
then-
unfortunately, it kind of begins anew at the
the-
schoolhouse door.
and picks up with fervor at the bedroom door.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's, I hate to get political on the last show of the year.
Sure you do.
Right.
You know?
But the party that's always stood for less government intrusion in people's lives is the most intrusive, the most invasively, offensively intrusive
well,
to
yeah.
women's bodies.
Yeah,
Like that has
especially.
anything whatsoever to do with anything legal.
Right, because I think
except
these people,
the relationship between a woman and her doctor.
one would think,
Right.
right? One would think. I mean, the relationship that these people are talking about really is not about anything personal. When these people say keep the government out of our personal lives, what they really mean is out of their wallets. Right? Climb into bed with
Sure.
somebody else. Don't climb into my bed, but climb into other people's beds. That's okay. Just stay out of my wallet.
So where does this come from that 62% of Americans identify as pro-choice and 38 as pro-life?
That's actually also a combination of Guttmacher and NIH. Right? So
Okay.
62% pro-choice, unqualified. So why is this still such an issue? Why do we
And
now
why
have...
is abortion becoming less and less accessible
That's right.
instead of more?
In 2019, there have been 58 individual pieces of legislation that have been put out there across the United States to restrict or completely prohibit abortion. Some of them are based on gestational age. We've had this whole slew of these just age bills. Some of them, like in Alabama, completely prohibit after 14 weeks. A bunch of them are doing this nonsense fetal heartbeat
Yeah.
kind of bill. Like the heart is anything but a rudimentary pump, you know, because people do this, you know, and they use the heart as that sort of, you know,
Sure.
sort of the love symbol
that's the
kind of
home
thing.
of
What,
the-
that gives it
yeah.
all kinds of legitimacy? No,
Yeah.
absolutely not. So those are, you know, I think those are just purely nonsensical, and they're completely ascientific. They have no legitimacy in any way, shape, or form except an arbitrary personal opinion. That's all they are. So we've got all of these bills that are prohibiting, that are restricting. There have been a bunch of bills that are already passed a number of houses that are just waiting, literally chomping at the proverbial bit for an outright overturn of Roe versus Wade,
Of
and they
course.
will not waste any time creating an outright abortion ban in their states.
Yeah. Well, yeah, of course. In the brief time that Sessions was Attorney General, like most conservative Republicans, all of a sudden they forgot that they were the ones about states' rights
Right.
and insisting on enforcing federal laws that supersede states' rights. When it
As
comes
long as they
to-
agree with it.
When it comes to their agenda.
Sure,
right?
sure. If it's about a gun.
Or guns or cannabis.
Guns and God, as I believe Obama once said.
Yeah,
That's
he
what people
paid
turn
that
to.
price for it, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But guns and medical cannabis,
Right.
those are going to be the issues.
Well, you know what? I wish they were issues that would bring people out. Unfortunately, these kinds of issues, and even the ones we're talking about, they do bring people out to the polls, but not the people that need to be out into the polls. They bring the people who are going to be the ones supporting the lowest common denominator. All right? Again, you want to talk about abortion as a trigger. Why aren't more, especially millennial women, concerned about the fact that they are a hair away from losing their reproductive freedom? Not even just related to abortion, but look at how many bills are put out there and how many state houses are trying to also restrict access to contraception. Right? So you have all of that. Where's the outrage among particularly younger women?
Yeah,
You
why
don't
not
see it.
the school strikes
Mm-hmm.
for sexual and reproductive health?
Yeah, exactly.
You're right.
It's not there. You want to talk about continuing to maintain some kind of marriage equality status. That's not going to last if things continue on, because more and more legislators are passing anti-gay marriage type of legislation. Right? Same thing with adoption. Right? We have all these people that complain about all these children languishing in the foster care system. Okay, so why are you going to say because you may not like the particular sexual partner somebody has, they're not fit to be parents?
Well, and again, like so many other things, people use this like crazy, wrong, outdated, or just bad guess, pseudoscientific rationale, right? Like gay people can't possibly adopt and raise kids because they'll turn them gay. Right?
Yeah,
Which
same thing with the
ignores
teacher
the
argument.
reality that like probably 99+% of gay people were raised by heterosexual parents whose heterosexuality never seems to rub off on making the gay kid straight.
Absolutely.
Why in the world would gay parents rub off on heterosexual kids and make them gay?
Right. Well, apparently there's something that doesn't
Wasn't
work
the
with
whole-
heterosexuality. That didn't rub off the right way for
You
too many
can
people.
it can, I think,
Yeah.
absolutely be read into those laws that heterosexual people, by virtue of being heterosexual, make great parents.
Sure.
Because that's all a kid needs is a mother and a father.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter if they hate each other and throw things and live in toxic homes and have the worst, most unstable marriages and parenting skills. At least they're not gay.
Yeah, exactly. And this is,
And-
remember the federal guidelines for the abstinence-only money for what passes as sex ed in way too many states is that one of those principles that they have to teach is that the only acceptable context
Are they still
for
doing
human
that?
sexual behavior is in a heterosexual married relationship.
Those
They're
A through
still
H
there.
federal.
They're still there.
It's still all that matching pot of money.
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
God.
But more and more states are refusing that.
So 68% of Americans support same-sex marriage.
Yes.
And this is including, like, you know, when the Supreme Court had to rule marriage equality for the whole country.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we need federal laws to supersede states' rights because,
Right.
you know, typically red states or more religious and homophobic states would never allow it.
Nope.
So the federal law says that every state has to, right?
Well, yeah. I mean,
But
there should be a
68%
relationship here.
Means that there are plenty of people in red states who support same-sex marriage,
Yes.
and yet policy does not fit the will of the people.
Right.
Fail again.
Right. I mean, there should be a clarification for a lot of these things too. That federal law should always trump state law when it's a matter of human rights. And I think what it really comes down to, and where a lot of the debates are a lot of these states have no compunction about restricting civil rights, human rights for individuals on a sort of just a whim. Whatever they arbitrarily decide are rights that some people should not have, they want to deny them. Right? So I think that's kind of the importance of federal law trumping state law, that it should not be an arbitrary, a human rights, constitutional rights should not be up to the state to decide. So I can see a need for that, but look at the misuse of all of this now.
Well, I think this argument's been made a lot recently, right? Constitutional amendments, every time in our country's history where the Constitution was amended, it was in recognition of the original Constitution not going far enough in protecting people's rights. In other words, fell short, sign of the times, whatever, right? You know, like the 14th Amendment, which was written to protect freed slaves' right to own money and property. Of course, it was completely perverted by rich white guys and created the corporation.
Yeah.
But every time, with just one exception, the only time the Constitution was amended to take people's rights away was Prohibition. And we all know what a dismal failure that
That's right.
was, right?
That's right.
So it took about 13 years before we went, oh, bad idea, never mind, let's go back in a race and forget that one.
And you know how that got
And-
passed, though? That's an interesting bit of trivia.
Yeah, there was a lot of confluence. There was the church group, the church ladies, the temperance
Well,
movement.
it was actually right, and the temperance movement were primarily the wives of the senators. And basically, they all got together and said to all of their collective husbands, if you don't pass this bill, you ain't getting any. So it was basically it was a prohibition on nookie.
So these
that
attempts
made the prohibition on
since,
alcohol.
Since the George W. Bush years, these attempts at having constitutionally defined marriage as between one man and one woman, you can't possibly use the Constitution of the United States to tell people how they can and can't live, in what relationship arrangement they want to have.
Doesn't mean people aren't trying.
But
You know, you could say you can't use God to justify murder and genocide and racism, but you
That
know, hey,
happens every
people
day.
do. People do.
Of
So,
course.
you know, I don't think if we tried, we could have managed to be unsexier in talking about sexual issues for tonight.
I know. Yes, it really
Could
is
not
that-
be
it's,
less sexy in
and
talking
that-
about this.
Yeah, I've been
So
talking
let's
about that for
let's
a
talk
couple
about
of
let's
years
talk about
now.
Pornhub.
That's the reality. When you meet somebody and they say, you know, at a cocktail party, and you say, what do you do? They say, oh, I'm a sexuality educator. Don't go, ooh, like
Yeah.
it's some sexy line of work, because most of the time,
No, this is what we do.
most of the time we're talking about pretty unsexy things. But porn is sexy. Porn is one of those controversial issues.
Porn's not supposed to be sexy.
Again, states lining up to declare porn a public health crisis. Again, passing laws
Yep.
about missing the point entirely, right? It's never about the porn, but yet
No, it really
we
isn't.
are obsessed
It really isn't.
in
So
this country.
so-
Therapists right out of graduate school are absolutely convinced that there is such a thing as porn addiction.
And
that-
sex addiction.
And that their patients are going to be coming to them
Right,
and they're
it's
going to have
nonsense.
to learn how to treat. I say, did I miss that class in DSM?
yeah.
Right? Where there is no such diagnosis, and for 35 plus years that folks have been trying to get one, there is no such diagnosis that comes anywhere close to what is commonly described as sex addiction
Right.
or porn addiction,
Yep.
right? So,
So some of the topics
Pornhub
here.
is probably the world's biggest porn central. What would you call it? Pornhub.
Yeah,
right?
it's a porn depot.
Right, a place where people can find anything they could possibly imagine, and even more things they never would have imagined. Right? And every year, Pornhub does thorough research on the year's searches and hits, and it's always a fascinating snapshot into what people are doing in the privacy of them in their own blue screen, wherever they happen to be, and the things that they're searching for, the types of sexually explicit material people are looking at, looking for, and the frequency of time that is used. This and our friend and colleague David Lay has been making this point. I think he made it on this show, and I think it's a really, really important one. While everybody is obsessing over porn addiction and the waste, how people are wasting their lives
so much
sitting in front of porn, the average time spent watching television in this country is about 5 hours a day. 5 hours. Think of the productivity and the work lost from people just zoning out, sitting in front of the television for 5 hours. Nobody's calling for epidemics or bans or cutting TV cables.
And let me also add into that too, because I don't know that we have I haven't seen any data on it. I don't know if there's an actual number. There probably is out there somewhere. But when you look at the amount of time on average per visit that guys in particular spend with their sports online.
Or the time people spend on Facebook every night. Or eBay.
Right.
Or Etsy, or any place else, any of the voluntary distraction that is the internet, or just texting, right? This fascinates me, that according to Pornhub's data, the 2019 average duration per visit in the United States, down a full second from 2018, is 10 minutes and 36 seconds.
Yep.
That's the great time suck. That's the public health crisis. That's what's destroying.
Worldwide, it's 10 minutes and 28 seconds. So we are a little bit ahead of the world.
United States is spending a little bit, just a few more seconds longer than the rest of the world. That is interesting. These stats, even if you're the most porn-averse, the last person in the world that would ever look at anything remotely related to porn, check out this data. It is fascinating.
And they do such a good job.
Country by country, all over the world, age groups.
I mean, the whole report, if you were to download, is over 100 pages. So they are really thorough. And who do you think spends the most amount of time looking at these images?
I love this. Average age, 25 and under. No, wait a minute. I'm sorry.
44 and under is 80%.
Right.
So 18 to 40 is basically 80% of all of at least Pornhub's use.
So nobody's terribly surprised by that.
No. But who spends the most amount of time are adults over the age of 65 and women. Women on average spend about 23 seconds longer than men.
That's interesting.
Watching all of these kinds of things. And when we look at the searches that defined 2019, some of the most common ones.
Well, one thing that leaps off the page across every age group is by far and away, well, with the exception of the 65 and older group, but every category, the number one most searched is Japanese, followed by hentai, which are issues we've talked about on the show.
Which you don't actually see in the older group.
Because a lot of, well, they probably don't know what it is.
Right.
Although it's second on the 65 and over group after mature, right? But a lot of what we've been talking about on the show over the past year is these attempts at legislating even animated, non-actual person images for what's being called child porn.
Right, and that's something that we're going to see
more and more
of.
Policy going complete opposite of public opinion. The most popular search terms are the things that want to be illegalized under the pretense of protecting the children. Because even a cartoon drawing of a young-looking person is assaulting a child somewhere.
Yeah, somehow. How that is, I'm not quite sure of as well.
A non-existent person.
Right? So they don't look at it as that's one person who's not out there with a child. You know, it's kind of a side we need to take a look at. I think it's very, very legitimate one.
And
But I just also want people to know that, again, this with all this rhetoric about porn being such a scourge, the porn industry apparently is also very accommodating. Because when we look at the over 65 age range, right, there's actually quite a bit. And they, again, talk about how they break things down with each age category. But you definitely see, and there's an increase in almost 80% in terms of the category growth, that adults over the age of 65 increased 96% in their viewing of amateur images, and that whole genre, what's called amateur porn. But I think what's really significant is the almost 80% increase in those older adults watching closed captioned porn.
It's fascinating.
Right? And I want to see how, again, with such dialogue and with all of the sound effects, I really now want to watch closed caption porn.
Unfortunately, our time goes by way too quickly, and we have to wrap it up for tonight and for the year.
For the year.
Right? But we are so, so grateful to our listeners and folks that are watching after on Facebook or on YouTube. Please keep sharing the show. Help us spread the word. Big thanks to Freddie, our producer. And we look forward to more Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers in 2020.
Yes, indeed. So have a wonderful and safe New Year's, and we'll see you next year.